Join me up front. Thank you, council members and citizens of Nashville, for attending this meeting. The topic is dedicated funding sources for improved mass transit in Nashville, Davidson County, and the region. Let me just briefly introduce our panelists in the order that they're going, basically the order they're going to speak in. Ralph Schultz, what's your title, Ralph? President, Executive Director?
Whatever you wish.
Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. Michael Skipper, the Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Shauna Huey from the Mayor's Office. And Ed Oliphant, the Interim Director of the Metro Transit Authority. Basically, this is not a public hearing, but it is a question and answer session for council members. About 2-3 months ago, appeared on our desk a memo from the Chamber of Commerce that talked about identifying dedicated funding source for mass transit as a legislative priority for our Chamber of Commerce. And many of us were curious as to what direction that meant and what that would bode. So I'm going to ask Ralph Schultz to, Ralph, the microphone right in front of you is operable. If you'll just make your opening comments and talk about why dedicated funding is a priority.
Well, good evening, everyone. Let me begin by saying that transit's a priority for this area and for this region to maintain the prosperity that we have continued to build upon as a community. You know, if you look back at the history of this area all the way back to the Civil War, you can see that the economic prosperity of this area is founded in the idea that this area was a distribution center. At the end of the Civil War, we were particularly well equipped from a transportation perspective to make us a distribution center for the Southeast. And then you kind of fast forward to the 1960s and you see that the establishment of these converging interstates on Nashville was again another stimulant to the economic growth of this area because we maintained our position as a distribution center for the area. Both of those times kind of emphasize the movement of goods, but as we know about the economy going forward, those cities and those areas that maintain workforce, an educated workforce that can meet the needs of business, are going to be the areas where jobs are going to grow. And we're demonstrating that right now at this current time, because what's happened is that the quality of life in Nashville, Tennessee, and the region of Nashville is so strong and positive that it is drawing workforce into this area. Our native population's not sufficient to maintain the growth of jobs. So as our workforce grows, then the jobs that are here are retained here, and the jobs, the relocating companies are attracted here. Now, to go back a step to the beginning of the process, it's quality of life that attracts that workforce. And if you look at the present day economy, what you see are wages and salaries growing at a slow rate. And you see that young people, particularly in the 18 to 35 demographic, are making a different set of decisions with the way they expend their income because their household income is always under pressure. So as we look forward to job growth, we've been leading the country for the last 3 years in this category. As we look at population growth, we've grown 25% since 2000, between 2000 and 2012. We know that those young people, particularly the 18 to 35 demographic, are looking for alternative transit to having a car. It costs about $15,000, $12,000 to $15,000 on average to own a car. They're migrating to our area from places that have transit, and that makes transit really key from an economic development perspective. Maintaining the economic spread that we have here, that is, we have a low cost of living at 88% of the national average. We have a high per capita income of 115% of the national average. That 27% advantage gets shrunk when people look at the cost of private education, if they're not satisfied with the education opportunities for their kids, or for providing additional vehicles for their household because they're coming from an area that has mass transit, but they don't find that rapid transit here. So from a quality of life perspective, from an economic development perspective, from a prosperity development perspective, we're going to need transit going forward as this entire region continues to prosper. A couple of years ago, the state legislature, I guess maybe it was almost 5 years ago now, the state legislature enacted legislation that enables counties to work together to create dedicated funding sources for transit on a regional basis. We continue to advocate for those counties to collaborate with each other to find the appropriate dedicated funding source when the appropriate transit system has been developed, designed, and begun to be put into place. We're not at the point yet where that whole regional system has been developed because, quite honestly, right here in the center of the region, we don't have multimodal opportunity for the people that would arrive at this destination to be able to get to their destinations effectively. And then finally, for those people that need to leave this area to go to other places in the region, there's no way for them to get there, at least no convenient way to get there. So we are advocates for a dedicated funding source that will be established in the future among these counties, taking full advantage of that state legislation. But at this point in time, the need to develop that dedicated funding source has not really arrived in this area. So let me just close my comments, and I guess I go right to Michael by saying, we know in the future there will need to be a dedicated funding source developed to support regional transit. That's something that will have to be developed between the counties on a regional basis as we go forward. We also know at this point in time that that dedicated funding source has not been identified, and the need is not great to identify that dedicated source at this time, but we do have to get started on creating that central spine of a regional transit system.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you, Councilman Tigert, for the invitation today. It's a pleasure to be here with Ralph and Shauna and Ed to talk with you about dedicated funding for mass transit. My role today really is to back up and share with you all the reasons why we're talking about mass transit in general across Middle Tennessee. Our organization is one of many listed on the screen that is responsible for trying to figure out the best strategy for investing our federal transportation dollars into the community to achieve good outcomes. Some of those outcomes manifest themselves on the transportation system with respect to dealing with traffic congestion and improving your travel times, but other outcomes that we're concerned about relate to economic development. That's our partnership with the Chamber, or health, or the environment, or other issues that affect ultimately the quality of life for residents across Middle Tennessee. Specifically, the Nashville area MPO is a 7-county publicly funded agency. Our history spans back to the late 1960s when we were created by an act of the U.S. Congress, in part to delegate the decision-making authority for how federal transportation dollars would be invested in metropolitan regions of the nation. So there's an MPO in every urbanized area of America, just like there's a DOT for every state of the union. And our role really is to convene city and county leaders with state and federal partners to decide jointly how we're going to use federal dollars for our transportation system, which spans roadways, bridges, transit, walking and biking facilities, anything that helps get people moving around our metropolitan area. And in the end, it's the MPO that is the conduit for accessing those federal dollars, whether it be you all in Davidson County trying to pursue federal dollars, or it be the State Department of Transportation accessing federal grants. The MPO Executive Board, which is comprised of city and county mayors and the governor by way of his representation by the Commissioner of Transportation, jointly ultimately authorize those funds for transportation projects. But we're one of many in the region that are coming together to talk about the issue of mass transit and ultimately how to pay for the mass transit vision that's laid out in the regional transportation plan. Our MPO covers 7 counties, as I mentioned. It's a relatively recent expansion to include include all of Robertson and Murray counties. But the history of the MPO used to be that it was centrally located within Davidson County. So as Davidson County's urbanized area has grown, so has the MPO footprint. Again, we convene city and county leaders with state and federal officials, ultimately to adopt every 4 or 5 years a regional transportation plan. This plan is forward-looking, typically 25 years at a time. It's fiscally constrained, meaning it's more than just a wish list of roadway and transit projects we want for our region, but it's an estimation of federal and state revenues that are going to come our way over that period of time, filtered across our top regional priorities for transportation program. So it's a fiscally constrained schedule of projects for the next 25 years from federal and state grant sources over that period of time. The other major thing that we provide to the community is the regional work program, or the TIP. The TIP is the short-range component of our long-range plan, like your capital improvement budget and work program. This is our work program that ultimately implements the projects in the plan. So this is where we're assigning very specific grant programs to real projects and identifying the phase of the project, be it preliminary engineering and design or right-of-way acquisition or construction. Any project that is federally funded through the MPO, which would be any project federally funded in our region, has that level of transparency to it with respect to where projects are scheduled along the way. And to give you a sense of the types of dollars we're talking about over this period of time, for all of transportation from state and federal sources, we estimate having about $6 billion through the year 2035 to invest in our infrastructure. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but when put up against the significant challenges we face, it sort of dwarfs in comparison. The $6 billion plan is through 2035, and then the first 5 years of that plan that was adopted along with the plan back in 2010 was about $1 billion that would be put out to work within a 4 or 5 year period. So these are the two documents that the MPO is most known for, but it's the convening of local and state interest to ultimately make these decisions together. And it's really in the development of these two things that has led us to more fully consider the role of mass transit in solving some of our transportation problems looking into the future. Real quick before I get into some of the forecasts that we're looking at that's really driving a lot of the policy discussion. This is a look at the cost-feasible roadway project list that schedules projects through 2035 in 3 separate horizon periods. This is all available on the website for your browsing. And then this is the other major component of our regional transportation plan. The Regional Transportation Plan, or the 2030 RTP, if I may use an acronym, really was the first time our region came together and began to define what it meant to want to integrate mass transit into our regional transportation system. We had been talking about transit for decades, but everybody had a slightly different idea of what that might mean. So the 2035 plan put forward this bold new vision for mass transit and called for a variety of services across the entire region over the next couple of decades. Now, the issue here on the transit side of our plan is that most of what you see there on the map is not funded. It's not part of the fiscally constrained plan that I just talked about, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One is the way federal funding works, has worked historically. It puts transit at a disadvantage within metropolitan areas like ours. Number two, a lot of the federal funding that goes to transit projects needs to be leveraged by local skin in the game, and thus part of the reason what we're talking about dedicated funding here in Middle Tennessee is that if we're going to get the federal government to pay for a good chunk of these investments, we'll need to have the dedicated funding in place to leverage those federal grants. That's one of many reasons why we're talking about that now. I'm not going to bore you with these billboards, but there are a lot of reasons we're talking about transit, and you'll see some of these play out here in the next few slides that I have. But we're changing as a region, first and foremost. Not only in terms of our growth rates, but in terms of who we are as a people, as a region. The market is shifting around us with respect to what people want out of their housing choice and transportation choices, and a lot of that stuff is manifesting itself within current day Nashville, and we continue see that trend escalating over the next couple of decades. We start off our forecasting, which is where I'm headed now with these slides, with a look at the population and employment forecast for the region. We're the agency that's responsible for a lot of the numbers that you see in the headlines with respect to 1 million more people living in Middle Tennessee by the year 2035. That used to be the case. Our forecast has actually accelerated a bit. We're looking at having more than 3 million people in the 10-county region, not the MSA, not the MPO planning area, but a 10-county region that we do this develop this transit vision for. Over 3 million people by the year 2040. And just to give you a sense of what that looks like, that's bigger than the Denver metro area today and approaching the size of Seattle. So if you've been to either one of those communities, they're a good case study for what a place that large looks like. Instead of having to wait around for the next 25 years to see what a place like that looks like. We pull our population employment forecasts from a national forecast, and that's really important to us because we're constraining our view of our world based on the way other people around the nation are viewing our role in population employment forecast for the entire nation. What I'm going to show you now is sort of the growth that is expected to come to the state over the next 25 years and the role that our region, and in particular Nashville, plays in driving the state's economy over that period of time. So back in 2010, there were about 6.5 million people across the state. About 27% of those folks lived in the 10-county region. Over the next 30-year period associated with this forecast, we expect 2.5 million new Tennesseans. More than half of them are expected, based on this national forecast, to reside in the 10-county region. And as substantial as that statistic is, what's even more interesting in looking at the forecast is that Rutherford County and Williamson County are both expected to leapfrog Chattanooga-Hamilton County during that time period. So imagine essentially 2 Nashvilles to the south of Nashville today, and that gives you a sense of the order of magnitude of growth that we have coming our way. At the MPO, it's not good enough for us to just think about these population employment forecasts at the county level. Our job eventually is to predict traffic on the roadways so that we could identify roadway and transit projects to meet the demand. So we feed that stuff into a land use model, and I'm not going to open the hood entirely this afternoon, but if you're interested in it, I'd be happy to talk with you more about it. But we have this land use model that predicts that growth down to the parcel level, and it takes a lot of things into consideration, including existing development patterns and environmental constraints that would dictate where growth can and can't go. We're looking at generalized future land use across the entire region, so the Nashville Next process that's carrying out now ultimately helps to shape that public policy that we're looking at with respect to the modeling. We also look at the urban form as prescribed by your land development regulations, not only in Nashville, but across the region. We put all that together, and that helps us understand the capacity of land to support new growth. We also look at market suitability, and this is a submodel that we use to represent the market influences on growth and development. And the developers across the region have been working with us over the past several years to refine this portion of the model, which mixes with the public policies to ultimately lead to what I'm about to show you now. And by the way, I talk really fast anyway, naturally. I'm going a little bit quicker than normal tonight because I want to respect your time on a Monday afternoon. But are there any questions so far about anything I've talked about? All right, well, I'll go on and show you the resulting forecast from our land use model. This is, what you see there is the first map, the 7-county MPO area and the existing land development pattern. These are parcels that have development on them, so it's not the entire parcel is built out necessarily. And then each subsequent map is the new property being affected by new development in each subsequent decade. So these are the new properties that are getting development through the year 2040 by decade. And this is the cumulative look at that growth and development. Like I said, though, these are individual properties being affected by development, not necessarily these properties developing to their fullest extent. This is a look at a couple of different ways of looking at where household growth is happening by decade across the region. I apologize, I believe this is employment. This is where employment growth is happening by decade across the region. This is household growth by decade across the region. Okay, just another way of looking at it. The next couple of maps I have are people and jobs by density. So you can see the intensity of the land uses and the growth and development pattern that we expect to come our way. 2020, 2030, 2040, and then 2010 and 2040 side by side. So a couple of things that we're beginning to see in these land development forecasts, and we've been doing this for a couple of decades now, and what we're beginning to see with these forecasts is we're still seeing a lot of suburban sprawl happening throughout the Middle Tennessee area, but we're starting to see market shift to intensification of land uses within cities, which is really quite compelling when we start to think about this from a transportation standpoint. So the next round of maps I have for you are a look at the predictions from our traffic model. Again, the 7-county MPO area and the major roadways throughout the region. This is congestion today. This is a congestion based on volume of cars on the roadway, not congestion caused by accidents or incidents, weather-related things, which, by the way, is about 50% of the cause of the congestion in our region. But this is basically the roadways in 2010 that are over capacity or experiencing travel speeds that are below most people's tolerances. This is 2040. The assumption here is that we've built out our work program, so that short-range billion-dollar work program that I mentioned. After we build that out, this is what we're looking at in terms of congestion by the year 2040. And this tends to not leave folks with a rosy perspective on our future. But I have to say, as scary as this map is, these next couple of maps are even scarier to me. This is a look at all the $6 billion worth of roadway investments we've got scheduled through 2035 on top of that congestion. And this is the resulting congestion after we build all of those roadway projects. And some of this is kind of common sense once you begin to think about it a bit, that, you know, in urban areas like ours, it's very difficult to add capacity through roadway widening. We just simply don't have the real estate or the financial means to acquire the real estate, to put businesses out of business, or to displace folks from their communities, to widen roadways at any cost. And so this is really what's framing a lot of the discussions with respect to mass transit on a regional scale, is that the reality is successful urban areas have congestion. The more prosperous places have found a way to get people around that congestion, and instead of sort of forcing them to succumb to the negative side effects of sitting in traffic so long for so much of their day. This is another look at congestion as we're forecasting it based on severability, whereas the previous maps were just whether something was congested or not. This is 2010. This is 2040. And this is, now we're getting into some neighborhood level congestion. So these maps are not showing you congestion on a specific roadway, but congestion within these little quarter mile by quarter mile areas where you can start to look at the aggregate performance of the transportation system at the local level. These are some of the measures that we look at to translate those maps into sort of a real world impact. And I won't go through all of these statistics. These two are probably enough. By the year 2040, this VHT per capita, this is the amount of time we're spending in a car on a daily basis. Based on the building out our short-range plan, that $1 billion worth of investments through 2015, 2017, we still expect a 113% increase in the daily time in cars by residents across Middle Tennessee. That's more than doubling the amount of time we're spending on our cars by the year 2040. And that's not because we're going to be driving further. In fact, our forecasts show a slight reduction in the number of trips you might make in the future, and shorter distances as people begin to work and live in closer proximity. This is because our average travel speeds are deteriorating by 26% across the system. Even after we build out the $6 billion roadway plan, and this is not a case to not make those investments. There are a lot of sort of what we're saving in terms of lost opportunity by building those projects is enormous. But even after you build those, when we look at system level performance from a congestion standpoint, we're only able to sort of modestly hit some of those values into the future. The cost of congestion is already very heavy on our area. Some of you may be familiar with the Urban Mobility Report that's published every couple of years by the Texas Transportation Institute out of Texas A&M. Don't let the name Texas fool you. This is something that gets picked up by Yahoo and USA Today and all the Tennessee and all the news outlets, sort of where we understand the rankings about congestion across America. So if you've ever seen Nashville be ranked against other metro areas, this is where it comes from. And this report estimates that we're already spending $800 million per year in wasted fuel and lost time sitting in congestion. That's just the amount of time we're not going anywhere, sitting in that congestion caused delay. That's more than $1,500 per commuter per year. This isn't for the entire region. This is just for the Nashville-Davidson urbanized area, which is a small portion of that entire region. This is a 50% increase since 2000. And over a 25-year period of time, that's $20 billion. And that's assuming fuel prices hold constant during that time. So take that $20 billion in indirect costs associated with congestion and compare that to that $6 billion figure that I mentioned earlier as to the amount of revenue we had to invest in the system to make it more efficient. So these are all several of the reasons why we've sort of focused our vision away from relying solely on the automobile towards transit. Very quickly, how much time do I have, Charlie? Am I doing all right?
You're doing okay. Another minute or two.
That contradicts in my head. But I'll do my best to wrap this up. This is a look at some of our peers. This is really eye-opening stuff for a lot of people. You know, when we look at the amount of lane miles that we've built in Middle Tennessee, and by the way, I failed to mention this earlier, we're not a transit agency, we're not a transit advocate, we're traditionally a roadway planning organization, and what we're realizing is that, you know, we're kind of stuck. We're not sure what we're going to do if we're only allowed to widen roadways in the future and keep our place prosperous. But we're already kind of so far out in front with respect to roadway capacity. I mean, this is lane miles per capita. It's cut off on the big screen, but this is lane miles per capita, sort of a measure of roadway supply, if you will, for the population. Look at our peers, Austin, Charlotte, Denver, Louisville, Memphis, Orlando. We're all, you know, we're sort of exceeding all of those in terms of the amount of roadway supply we're putting out there for the population, save Memphis, which is leading the pack. When it comes to transit revenue hours per person, again, this is a way of measuring the supply of transit we're providing our population. We're falling way behind, and these are sort of have gotten worse even more recently. Again, this is the bold vision for mass transit. This is what it looked like when we adopted the plan back in 2010, but late last year, we translated that into a tube-style schematic map to give people a better sense of how they may navigate something in the future. And there's a lot of things happening on this map. There are 3 rapid transit lines on a regional scale: rapid transit to Gallatin, Murfreesboro, and Franklin. I'll talk very quickly about what that is. Commuter rail to Clarksville, all being sort of tied together by the rapid transit line called the AMP here between West Nashville and East Nashville. Then some other BRT-like corridors that could evolve into something heavier in the way of investment as density begins to occur along places like Charlotte Pike and Nolensville Road and Murfreesboro Road. But this is all really what's driving people's view of the types of projects that we'll need to identify for programming in our partners like the RTA and the MTA who will be responsible for implementing this stuff. To give you an idea of what we mean when we say rapid transit on a regional scale, probably the best inspiration we have for what this might look like in our region is the Denver metropolitan area, which is good because they're a really good futuristic peer for us. This is a place that has similar densities, similar growth patterns. It's not New York and Chicago or Portland. This is a look at their Interstate 25 corridor south of town. This is about 15, 16 miles south of downtown Denver. It looks very much like a Cool Springs area. And you can see the train. This is a light rail, but it operates like a heavy rail out in this part of the region, operates within the right-of-way of the interstate. And it serves these nodal developments along the way that are typically connected by a park and ride lot and a shared parking by the residents of these areas, both residents and workers. As it gets into downtown Denver, it operates, you know, what most folks probably consider like a streetcar. So it's the same product that's being delivered over that 16 to 17 mile stretch. And so it serves different purposes and provides different benefits depending on where you are along the line. And this is what's driving our vision for rapid transit to Gallatin, Murfreesboro, and to Franklin. For the commuter rail lines, what we're looking at is kind of upgrading the diesel-electric locomotive that we have along the Music City Star and upgrading them with a vehicle like this. This is a diesel multiple unit technology that allows you to operate a light rail type vehicle that's compliant with the Federal Railroad Authority in terms of operating with freight. You can give a light rail type service within the urban core and then run the commuter trains less frequently to destinations in the suburbs and the cities that you're trying to connect. So imagine this in North Nashville on your way to Clarksville, this type of service connecting Meharry, TSU, Bordeaux, before heading out to Ashland City and Clarksville. These are sort of the images that are associated with our regional vision for mass transit. Now, in terms of implementing transit, I think now we're getting to the part you're most interested in. There's a lot of steps involved in getting this done. Our modern timeline for this really dates back to 2009 when the enabling legislation was passed to help the RTA reform, to help assist in implementing this vision. That was 2009. Also in 2009, the Mayor's Caucus formed to provide political leadership at a regional scale for mass transit as part of the Regional Transportation Plan and ultimately for dedicated funding. The Transit Alliance was formed out of a partnership between the Nashville Area Chamber and other stakeholder groups in the region to provide sort of a business case for transit, which are obvious to folks who study it, not so obvious to people that are on the sidelines presently. The regional vision and the policy and the plan, this is the MPO's Regional Transportation Plan, which represents a formal public policy for transportation, was adopted in 2010. So we're now positioning transit as a key priority. In early 2012, the RTA reconstituted to take advantage of that enabling legislation that was passed in 2009. And now the MPO is currently expanding its boundaries to take advantage of the interest of some of our adjacent communities to begin to program the right types of investments into our work program, which is embedded within this TDOT's Transportation Improvement Program. Sort of where we are now, because a lot of folks are interested in what we ought to be doing on dedicated funding. And there have been, a lot of conversations the past couple of years about what other communities are doing to pay for transit and what we might do locally to pay for transit, at least the share of transit we're not paying for yet. And where the conversations tend to get interesting is that, we begin to realize that before we ask a voter or a member of a local legislative body or the state legislature to dedicate funds for transit, we first need to identify what projects those funds are going to benefit. And that's where we are now. We've got the long-range plan, which has a vision for transit. Ed, I believe, will talk a little bit about the RTA's process to develop a master plan that will translate that vision into a set of projects that have a schedule and refined costs associated with them. Once that package is developed, we'll have a better sense of the cost, the timing of the need for paying for those improvements, and a better look, a much more transparent look at sort of what a dedicated funding package may look like. That's not stopping us from studying the issue. And we've got a tremendous amount of data from communities across the region. I'll show you some of the, before I turn this mic over, show you a look at some of the activity that's happening across the region. I'll leave these bullet points for you. Let me get to some of the good stuff. This is a look at the same peers I showed you earlier and who has dedicated funding and who doesn't. Basically, Nashville and Memphis are the only two. Nashville is really one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country that doesn't have dedicated funding for transit, and there are many, many, many smaller communities that have had dedicated funding for decades. But there's been a lot of activity nationally on at least voter-initiated dedicated funding. This is a look at some measures that have failed since 2000 and the geographic distribution of those. But what we're actually seeing is about a 7 out of 10 success rate on balloted initiatives for transportation funding. Where you can make the case for the projects, voters tend to follow behind you. And this is a look at all the approved initiatives. A lot of these transit-specific, most of them are comprehensively transportation with transit as a key component, where the activity has been from a ballot box standpoint across the nation since 2000. And again, since 2000 to 2014, we're looking at about 7 out of 10 of those initiatives passing. Some of them fell the first time and passed the second time around. But that's a look at sort of why we're talking about mass transit and some of the questions we need to answer before we dive into the specifics of dedicated funding. And I know I probably went way over. I'll turn it over to Shauna.
Good afternoon. I'm Ed Oliphant, the interim CEO. And basically, I just want to back up what Michael's been talking about. We also manage I'm with the Metropolitan Transit Organization, MTA, and as well as the RTA. This dedicated funding would actually come through, as Michael explained, through the enabling legislation and the reconstitution of the RTA, to come through the RTA. What are we basically trying to do? We're trying to demonstrate the need for this. Just some rough numbers to give you an idea. Over the last 6 to 8 years, right now, in the whole region, because you have to look at it as a region as opposed to individual pockets. And when I say region, we're looking at Murfreesboro, we're looking at Rutherford County, Williamson County, Davidson, Sumner, Robertson County, we're looking at those. When you combine all those, in last fiscal year, we provided 11.6 million rides in that whole region. And what are we basically doing? We're taking the people from the outside the county area, outside the city itself, and feeding those people in. And what Michael talked about is in terms of express bus service. We have to have a way to disseminate those people through the city, as Michael was talking about, and having some kind of spine or good transit system to bring them in from the outside counties and then disperse them through the city. That's basically the job of MTA. So there's connectivity between the agencies is critically important. As Michael said, we only see that growing in terms of the need and the desire. For example, this year alone, the RTA is already seeing about a 17 to 18% increase in that regional bus service as it comes into the downtown Nashville area, and we're dispersing those. A lot of that growth is coming from, ironically, from the Rutherford County area, which is he was showing in those futuristic looks at where the concentration was going to be. It will be to the southeast and to the south. So basically, dedicated funding would be used to service those. Right now, how is it working? Basically, we have federal funding we call CMAQ, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality funding, that is used to basically seed these services and get them started. It has a 3-year limitation. What we're looking at on the RTA side, and what is even screaming more for the need for dedicated funding, is the fact that 3 years, we started it basically in 2012 and 2013, that funding will basically stop for those areas. Now, the whole idea, the whole concept of this funding was to seed those services, get them started, and hopefully get the local partners to see the benefit of those and be able to fund that. What we're finding is that the local partners, i.e. the counties and the cities within those areas, are not going to be able to sustain that funding because it is such a significant amount of federal funding that we're seeing. Some of that's going to be affecting the RTA possibly in 2015, this coming fiscal year, but the major impact will be in 2016, where those local counties, including Davidson, will have to take a hard look at what is valuable service, what will get congestion down and in terms of cars coming into the city, and be willing to fund that. Dedicated funding is the perfect opportunity for that to occur. The reconstitution basically was where all these members of the RTA said, yes, we want to be a part of this. And what did the reconstitution do? It basically expanded the powers of the RTA to be able to issue bonds. The dedicated funding could either be used outright directly for the service, the capital or the operating expenses, or it could be leveraged to actually expand the services by issuing bonds and using those revenues in the dedicated, from the dedicated funding to pay those bonds back over a period of time and allow us to create that infrastructure that we need to help attack the growth that is going to be coming to this area. Really, that's all I can say as far as how we're positioned, and we're just demonstrating that need. Again, the ridership growth speaks for itself. The time I've been here, since 2002, we've seen MTA's ridership go from about 6 million to 10 million. We've seen the RTA was at about 200,000 from all those regional express buses coming into town to now over 800,000. So we definitely see the need and would appreciate this conversation continuing. And now I think I should turn it over to Shauna.
So Councilman Tigard said earlier today that I was in the position where I'd be batting cleanup, and I think that's exactly right. I'll just take a few seconds to add some of my thoughts to what these guys have already said. But I think after listening to everybody, a couple things become clear. One is that, you know, if you look at Michael's maps, I think most people would agree that we do need some transit solutions for our region. And if you listen to Ed's numbers, you know, it becomes clear that more and more people throughout our region are taking mass transit. And from what Ralph said, I think, you know, we all know that we know that we need to do this, and we know that people will use it if we provide it, but we also we haven't figured out the details of, you know, this is still in the nascent stages of figuring things out. I wanted to highlight just a couple of things, and it really all goes back to this trip that the Chamber of Commerce took to Denver in 2009 as one of their leadership study missions. I'm sure a lot of you all have been on those, and you know, I wasn't working for the mayor when he took this trip, but so many people have mentioned this trip to me since I've started working here that I feel like I was on it myself. But two, I think the group that went on this mission in 2009 saw two great things that they then took home and in part under Mayor Dean's leadership brought back here and enacted here. And so one of those things was the Mayor's Caucus. which in Denver was a group of mayors throughout the region that came together to talk about issues of regional importance, one of which was transit. And so when they came back from that trip in '09, and Michael mentioned this as well, they started the same thing here. Mayors throughout the region get together on a monthly basis, and they talk about issues that are important to all of Middle Tennessee, and one of those issues is, of course, regional mass transit. The other thing that came out of that trip, or one of the many other things, was the idea of a transit alliance, which Michael also mentioned, but it really is a kind of a public-private, really more private sector group that works to talk to folks about the importance of transit and to help people understand why we need it and why it would matter to them in their everyday lives. So one of the things that was done in Denver and is now done here is the Transit Citizen Leadership Academy. And so the Academy is in its 5th year. They're just about to finish up, and maybe 30 or 40 people participate each semester, and what it does is empower folks from throughout the region to understand why we need transit and understand what that means for them in their communities on their daily commutes, and then to go back and talk to their friends and their neighbors and their colleagues about why it's important. So it's really building capacity. Both the Mayor's Caucus and the Transit Alliance are building capacity for us to move forward. The Mayor's Caucus has had a couple of meetings dedicated specifically to regional mass transit and the idea of dedicated funding and how we would move forward with it. And what they really realized was, as these guys have said, first we need to build the vision, and we need to help people understand why it matters. We need to help people understand the kind of system that we're going to build. And so that's really what the Mayor's Caucus and the Transit Alliance are working toward, kind of in separate, overlapping realms. So that's pretty much all I've got to say, and I think now we will open it to questions.
Council Lady Bennett is first in the queue.
Thank you, Councilman Tigert. I appreciate you putting this together, and I appreciate all the time that you all have given as our speakers today. You've given out this handout, and we're looking at Davidson County and the adjoining counties. All of your great slides, it looks at the adjoining counties. And I guess I'm concerned about the folks that come to Nashville to work every day and they travel our roads. But I'm more concerned about my constituents who live in Davidson County, and they're trying to get to work, and they're looking for the most economical, time economics as well, just to get to work and get to and from events and things like that. So I guess my concern really is, we've talked about funding and we've kind of danced around it a little bit, but I'd like to know more about what other counties are going to participate and help. Because being Nashville, it's great. We've got several things like the Titans and the Predators, and everybody likes to come to the games, but we get to foot the bill when there's a bill to be footed there. So I guess I really would like to know how they're going to help out, because I feel like we carry most of the burden.
I could start off by addressing that, and unfortunately there's not a direct answer to that question yet, because that's what's being figured out. I mean, that will be driven by the nature of the types of projects that are selected for funding over the course of the schedule. But the mayors are very aware of the sentiment to your question, and have bought into the value that investing in transit brings to their community. So nobody is sort of coming to the table at a regional level thinking or expecting Davidson County to foot the bill for regional mass transit. In fact, that's one of the reasons why, I'm speaking specifically to me and my staff, we wanted this conversation to be had on a regional level, because many of the services that you may initially invest in Davidson County are going to be extended out to the outlying counties, and people need to have a shared ownership in paying for those services. In fact, I think that one of the reasons why I like the Denver example so much is because, like I said earlier, the single transit product means something different to everybody depending on how and where you're using that line. So imagine the South Quarter going to Franklin is not just serving people coming out of Williamson County or people in Davidson County trying trying to get to Cool Springs to work. But it's also very likely the local rapid transit for the Franklin Road Corridor or 8th Avenue as it comes into the city. So these projects are one of the same in a lot of cases, and there needs to be a shared ownership in paying for them. Now, on the transportation, in the transportation arena in general, we have this idea of pooling resources to pay for projects is nothing new. That's how we operate on the transportation side. I know not every sector operates that way, but the NPO itself represents this shared pool of money from the federal government, and those mayors have to decide jointly where those funds are going to go into projects that benefit the region the most. And so probably of any of the sort of the issue areas that you may have a stake in, transportation has figured that out a bit better than say education, or I don't want to name other issues, but that's the sentiment going into this, that this is going to be a shared set of assets that are going to be invested in by folks across the entire region.
Anybody else? Okay.
I mean, it's just where we are. Nobody's made a commitment to invest anything yet because we haven't made a commitment to which projects we're going to be building. And that will dictate a lot the faces around the table that are going back home to convince their electorate or their local legislative bodies to say yes on something.
Well, I guess speaking as a legislative person, my concern, if you're going to want to bring forward, I'm just going to throw something out there, a tax, we hate that word, I'm going to be saying, what are they going to pay? Because we're carrying the pack mule here, and we're kind of getting tired of it. Folks want to move to Hendersonville for better schools, but they're an attorney in Nashville, but they're spending their tax base in Hendersonville for their home, their property taxes, most of their entertainment, their food, but they're making their money here and they're driving on our roads. So I want to see something that really applies to everybody. The second thing I real quick wanted to bring up was I spoke with a friend today who uses the bus system in itself. And she lives in Inglewood. She rides the bus to Vanderbilt. She spends an hour from Inglewood to Vanderbilt to work and an hour to go back. And I'm just stunned that our bus system, she spends 2 hours a day on the bus. That is very frustrating, and I can't emphasize enough, we've got to do something because there is a real problem out there.
I can address that a little bit because we as well, I won't say are frustrated, but based on the system that we have a spoken wheel where everybody comes into a central point and then goes back out. We do not have a lot of crosstown routes. The University Connector is one that is a crosstown route. We have probably three. We have the Midtown, which is the number 25. We have the University Connector, and we also have the Edmondson Pike Connector. We are very well aware of that and trying to work on crosstown routes. We actually did try one about 4 years ago that just did not get the demand that we thought it would. It's a matter of finding the right places to put them in and hopefully alleviate a lot of that. Going back to your previous question as far as what the other counties are contributing. Right now, I guess the Relax and Ride or regional bus service has been going since about 2008. It started with the Sumner County service. And when MTA took over management in the early part of 2000, latter part of 08 and first part of 2009, I saw the problem in exactly what you were talking about and developed a template because I wanted, just like Michael was saying, it needs to be a shared expense. And right now, I can say with confidence that the regional bus services that we have right now from the 5 counties that we have, everybody's sharing on that pretty much on an equal basis, including the state. I try to develop, because in order to be able to plan for these, to know what the expenses are going to be and to know where the sources of revenue are coming from, we all know that the fares are not going to do will not collect the full cost of the fare. There has to be a subsidizing piece to these services. I wish it could be fully covered through fares, but there's just no way we could do that at this point. So the template itself does basically take the partners, if you will, using the Rutherford County, for example. You have Rutherford County itself, you have the city of Murfreesboro, you have MTSU, you have Smyrna, Laverne, and Davidson County are all pretty much equal partners. Now, actually, Murfreesboro and Rutherford County carry a heavier burden on that specific route because they have federal funding of their own that they contribute to the service. But all in all, the template itself, which I hope will continue to move forward, already takes into account exactly what Michael was saying in terms of what this dedicated funding would look like. It would be a shared expense, and right now those are being shared. It looks like Davidson County on those are contributing more, but that's because they're paying a piece of all 5 of those regional bus services coming into the town. But as far as looking at them on an individual basis, it's a shared expense.
Councilman Claiborne.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for putting this discussion together, and for all of you who are here. I've listened to what each of you have said, and I have a mild bit of confusion that's come out of listening. I've heard Ralph say that we don't need to, that we do need to wait to identify a funding source until there is a need for that funding source in place. We don't need to go ahead and identify this funding source. I think that's what I heard you say. Michael talked about federal dollars and alluded to the fact that they require matching funds. And I'm thinking that he's moving toward the point of saying, well, we need to go ahead and start looking at what those matching funds are going to come from. And then you wound up saying that it's really not a priority at this point to do that. So my head's beginning to spin now.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I think what we're saying is that the proposal for a specific dedicated funding source is something that's unfortunately going to have to wait until we know what we want that money to go towards, and the magnitude and the range of the magnitude of order for the dollar amounts that we would need to put towards transit. I don't think you're hearing either one of us say there's not a sense of urgency or that we're shying away from the conversations about what those sources may look like, but there's not a specific proposal coming from any one of us yet, because we're still in the process of identifying the specific investments that would benefit from that dedicated funding.
Well, I would just counter you with something that Ed said, that the grant dollars that have already been given to this area have been used to put in place some systems as seed money. And he said that seed money is running out. And now the communities where those systems are in place, they're not going to be able to step up to the plate and continue with what has been put in place. So it would seem to me that the need is there. You know, there is an established need. There are established projects already here that say to us, we need to be looking at how we're going to continue funding this once these federal dollars leave. So I don't understand how you're saying that the need is not here, that the priority is not here, that we need to wait until we identify, because we already have projects that have been identified are in place and they're being used. But they're going to go away if we don't have something to keep them going. Yes, there are going to be new projects that are going to be identified, and there's going to be new federal money that's coming forward. It's going to have to have matching funds. So why are we trying to kick the can down the road and say, well, we don't need to be talking about whether we're going to do a gas tax or whether we're going to do a property tax or whatever. We do need to be looking at that. We do need to be having this conversation. It's not something that needs to be waiting. And so my question is to any of you, are any of these other 7 counties or 10 counties, whichever way you want to look at the region, are any of them having the serious conversation to begin that we're trying to start now with Charlie's proposals to say, okay, these are possibilities that we need to take a serious look at?
Yes, sir. And again, let me restate our position on this. There is a tremendous need to figure this out. There's a sense of urgency to begin talking about specific proposals for dedicated funding. I'm just trying to clarify that there has not been put forth a specific proposal for dedicated funding. That would need conversation with you all and an understanding of what we're going to invest in. But there's, without any hesitation in any one of our minds, a strong need to be figuring this out for both the long-term capital building plan that we acknowledge that we need to invest in, as well as to shore up the local financing for transit that's already in front of us. In the short term, we're looking at general fund contributions from these communities. And it's that annual budgeting process that is difficult for a group like the RTA or the Nashville MTA to operate on, not knowing year to year if those lines are going to be in service. That's a tremendous need in and of itself for the conversation about dedicated funding, but we simply have not positioned a proposal for a specific tax at this point.
Councilman, from our perspective, let me just say, we do see a sense of urgency, but we also know that you can't shortcut the public conversation that needs to be able to take place. There's an education process, there's a research and exploration process. We are now looking as a group with our joint organizations at the various methods by which this funding has occurred in other cities and see how it pertains to our economic environment. Every city we look at has different characteristics that cause dedicated funding decisions to be different in that community. So I would tell you that since '09, when the Mayor's Caucus was formed, the Transit Alliance was formed, and this was really identified as a priority need, working with professionals in the field, we have been investigating this issue. If you look at our travel schedule to go to cities for leadership study missions, you'll see this every year since 1992, transit's been a topic, and particularly this year when we were in Vancouver, which is a city much more similar to Nashville than you might think until you visited it. Secondly, I would also say to you that there are other county discussions taking place with policymakers, but they are as interested in finding out the information that we're all seeking to provide before they make any declarations or take any positions on a specific form or a combination of forms of funding. So we are pursuing this, us from a private perspective, these guys from a professional public perspective, to find out some of those answers.
Councilman Stanley.
So if we've been looking at this since 1992, we're not really any closer to a solution than we were in 1992.
Yeah, the one thing I would say was that there was a proposal in 1999 to have rail established fundamentally along this route with the federal government ready to provide 80% of the funding, and there was no interest in the community to establish that rail system. So there have been proposals along the way, but the urgency is increasing within the population now, and the call and the need for this transit solution is being discussed at this point in time.
And I agree, and I'll just, one more thing, Charlie, and then I'll stop. And I agree with the last thing that you said. I think there is a general consensus in the population that the transit problem is increasing and it's not going to decrease. It is going to become more and more of an issue, and as gas prices continue to go up, it's going to become more and more critical to find more economical ways to do that. So I think in terms of the mind of the general populace that there is a receptivity to this discussion. And my point is that we don't need to study what it's going to be any longer before we begin to have a parallel discussion on how are we going to pay for what it's going to be. That's my point. There needs to be two discussions taking place simultaneously, and we only have one at the present time. And so, Charlie, I appreciate your bringing, at least getting the conversation started with three options. And I would hope that as you go back to your organizations that you're involved in with these regional bodies, that you begin to emphasize to them that Nashville is actually beginning to talk about specific kinds of things. And they'd really like to see you begin that discussion too. Thank you.
Councilman Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Tygart. I appreciate you calling this meeting. I appreciate the individuals that addressed this meeting. You gave me information that I needed as well. But I wanted to inform everyone that I heard some statements made during the presentation where terms were used like mass transit, forecast, projections, and also the AMP. I don't know if an AMP in downtown Nashville is definitely going to be a mass transit project, because mass transit should address the commuters that are coming in from out of county into Davidson County to work. Downtown Nashville represents about 73 square miles of the 532 square mile Davidson County. But there are only 198,000 people that live in downtown Nashville. But this AMP, I'm interested in finding out where the money is going to come from. I know you said the RTA, you had a re-enabling constitution, and that would give you the right to raise bonds, to issue bonds for capital projects. I want to know where that money is going to come from. Is it going to come simply from Metro Nashville, or is it going to come from the outlying counties as well regarding this AMP? Because this AMP is a small, very small, lengthy project. It's only about 7.1 or 8.1 miles long, and it's only going to serve downtown Nashville. So MPO does not need to be involved in this. I know you mentioned the mayor's caucus. I want to see if Mayor Dean has had any noticeable conversations with outlying mayors of communities in the outlying counties. I want to know that. I'll let you know, too, that projections and forecasts are simply that. They are guesses. They're educated guesses, but they are guesses. I've been involved in projects before where these projections that are projected by the departments that are dealing with these projects have not been met. And so that project was never needed, and it was a waste of money. I want everyone to understand that. Number two, I just want to thank everyone here for the support that you have given, for the information you've given to me and to the other council members. But I think, too, that I want to find out where this money is going to come from. Is it going to come from a property tax increase that we're going to be responsible for passing? Or is it going to come from a number of different agencies or departments within the metropolitan government? And is it going to be shared with any of the outlying counties? I don't know if it is. I know that when we built the stadium in 1996 it passed, but we were going to take, for 30 years, we were going to take $4 million out of the Metro Water Services Department. And because of that, it was going to raise $120 million to build that stadium. Well, we built that stadium. But I've had issues with Metro Water Services because they do not have the money, they have said, to deal with capital projects in the outlying Davidson County area. Now, I've been involved in the local political arena for 27 years. I was involved with the RTA when it was first organized in 1990. I went to a number of community meetings out Castle Heights. And it was at that time that they were discussing the Music City Star. And then they were also wanting to follow Murfreesboro Pike to Rutherford County, Gallatin Pike to Sumner County, and Franklin Pike to Williamson County, to give Metro Nashville a dedicated mass transit program. I want to know if Metro Nashville has a dedicated program as of now. Does it have a mass transit program as of now? Has the RTA met its obligations to the citizens of this city and the state?
Councilman Stanley, you raised some great points. I'm going to move on. Councilman Blaylock.
You had mentioned earlier that there was 11 million rides that the bus was using. Now, is that seats or is that actually people on the bus?
That is actual rides on the bus.
Okay.
It's an actual, person, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Domine.
Thank you, Councilman Tigert. Quick question. You had mentioned the AMP, and I was curious what transportation dollars have been spent thus far on that particular program, and what the combination of those might be between city, state, or federal dollars.
Do you have that information?
I don't have the exact numbers on. We can certainly get those numbers to you. I will say that right now we're still in the final design and engineering, and as you know, the council last year approved the $7.5 million. Has that all been spent? By no means. We're just working through with a consultant now to do the final design and engineering, and basically that's all the money that has been spent so far.
Okay.
Ed, could you get that information to Ms. Waller in the council office and break it down a little bit finer by category? I think would be very helpful. Is that part of your question, Mr.
Yes,
Dominic?
the other thing I have is, and Council Lady Blaylock had asked the question about the actual ridership. I'm curious, the handout that we were given just as the meeting was started, and I just laid it down right here, indicates ridership from county or people commuting from county to county, in and out of Davidson County for work. I'm curious what percentage of those commutes are being met through the current RTA projects, and what the ridership is from county to county, coming into Davidson County versus going out through the RTA programs. And I'm sure you have to get that.
Yeah, we don't have that information.
I understand it's a little more complex, and Ralph likes to cover the big picture, but I want to get down to the nitty-gritty because that's part of my job for fiduciary responsibility here in the council. You also had mentioned that we need to improve mass transit, and one of those issues that we have in Davidson County is a hub and spoke system. And we've put in 3 crosstown routes. It's been identified for some time that crosstown routes are a big need here in the county in order to address the length of commute from one area of town to another. And so we've done 3. My concern is if we do not have a dedicated funding source and we wait until there's some big project that has a lot of glamour associated with it to figure out a way to get the funding, we may miss out. It's sort of like going pre-approved to look for a house. We need to do that as a community. We don't need to keep, well, let's wait to see what kind of house we want, then we'll see about getting pre-approved. We can come up with what we can spend and make a plan based on that. But if I get the data on when we can plan to add additional crosstown routes and what the cost of that might be, and then the maps that you showed, and this is another point rather than a question, indicates the population growth is south and southeast of Davidson County. That's current and planned. What are the specific plans to address those needs in the upcoming growth? Because I know there's been a lot of discussion over the last year or so about the AMP, but even on this map you show, the commute locations don't align with where the proposed AMP is at. They align in a different corridor. And I would like to know what the plans are to address the projected growth that you presented here is, besides just how something might connect with an AMP that's going to connect with Music City Central. Because it's important for us to make that determination as we move forward.
Thank you, Council Lady Dow.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming, and also Councilman Tigert. I just want to say thank you for putting this together. I was in Washington in March and went to Tennessee Tuesday with our senators, Bob Corker and Lamar Alexander, and I can tell you that everyone at Congressional League of Cities and from whatever state, the biggest conversation in the room was transportation. And the message that we received from Secretary of Transportation Fox was the same message that every leader there received, is that we are not going to be able to continue to rely upon federal funding for transit, and local and state governments are going to have to start looking at how to finance transportations within their own communities, states, and cities. So I think the conversation about how we fund mass transit is very valid, and I think we're behind in the conversation. Last year, over 20 states had conversations about how do we fund mass transit. And we can spin our wheels all day long debating on AMP and train and bus, but at the same time, we're growing. I grew up in Chattanooga, and I see the same thing happening here that happened in Atlanta, and I feel that we're behind the curve. So I'm glad we're having the conversations, and one of the things that I want to bring up, I think that Councilman, he asked about, how do we plan on going forward funding? Because one of the things we talked about is the MAP 21, the Tiger grants, and how local municipalities are going to have matching funds. And the question I get more often than ever is, are we planning to take money from our general fund and set it aside for mass transit? Are we looking at regionally partnering with the areas like Rutherford County, which borders our area, that have a high number of commuters coming into Davidson County, like bordering with them and looking at setting aside some type of transportation fund that comes out of their budget, not our budget? But I think it's valid that we start having these conversations, because what I do know is that it's going to be very difficult to fund a transit system, the kind that we need for the growth that's planned and the growth that's happening now out of our budget. Even right now, I think if we look at mass transit, we need regional transit hubs, especially out in Southeast Davidson County, as we continue to build up downtown and we get people out in our area. I think when we look at how we plan, we need to start looking at some regional transportation hubs and partnering with, areas where we see a lot of growth, which, Councilman Dominy alluded to, Southeast Nashville. They laughed about the gentleman proposing the railway going down I-24, but, that is a busy corridor. We have a lot of commuters coming in. We're bringing more businesses downtown Nashville. More people are commuting into work. And so I'm just wondering, any suggestions you have, because I think we do need to talk about funding, about just on a local level, how we can better fund transportation and get money over into the transit to do more regional transportation, because that's what I'm most interested in, having a regional transit hub out in that southeast area of the county that will afford us to go around where we need to go regionally versus coming downtown to a hub and coming back. How do we fund and get the money there that's necessary to provide that access, because that's where the population is, and that's where the people are, and that's where they're coming from in our city every day.
Thank you, Councilman Westerholm.
I want to thank everyone for being out here this afternoon, and I still hear a little noise, Charlie. All right, thank you.
Try it.
Okay, great. One thing, I do appreciate all the presentations. One thing I've been looking at, and I've enjoyed in this presentation and presentations of similar sorts in the past, is looking at growth patterns and how we get there. And I was reminded, as this was posted, about a presentation or a plan I think Los Angeles County did with one of their recent projects, where a certain percentage, maybe 75% of revenue generated went towards mass transit. The other 25% went towards bike and pedestrian infrastructure improvements throughout the county. And I was thinking about that again as hearing your comments, Mr. Skipper and Mr. Schultz, as far as, especially in light of the Vancouver trip, looking at other cities that have these sort of dedicated funding and what they are going towards. Is there a sense that they're just for mass transit? As we look at Davidson County, understanding that we will see more infill, I'm expecting other counties will also see their fair amount of infill as well. To what extent can we anticipate that some of the revenue generated from those, whatever this dedicated funding ends up being from a source, but on the expenditure side, will it be directed towards all sorts of things for a truly multimodal system? Is it anticipated this will be just for mass transit? Can you speak towards any thoughts about that? Are we having those conversations yet?
I mean, that's exactly the nature of the conversation that's happening right now. And I, don't want to leave anybody with the impression that the options aren't being talked about right now as we understand them from the options that are being exercised in other communities across the nation. And many of these ballot initiatives that you see on the screen here are multimodal in nature. There's some balance between roadway investments, particularly roadway investments in terms of traffic operations and safety upgrades, more so than big roadway widening projects. But some balance between roadway investments and transit investments. Transit investments happen on the roadway system, so they're sort of one and the same with that respect. And so a lot of these are multimodal, and that's been part of the conversations, is if you're going to have a capital spending plan that's tied to dedicated funding, what is our process going to be to prioritize the projects that would benefit from that funding? And there's that's part of it. The beauty of this is that we're used to doing that. I mean, together as a region. When it comes to federal funding and state funding, we have those conversations every single year, and the decisions of those conversations manifest themselves into our 2035 regional transportation plan that lays out a multimodal strategy for transportation in the region. I mean, the dedicated funding conversation is very specifically aimed at leveraging federal funds that we want to receive instead of sending those to Denver or Charlotte, and then finding ways of reducing the burden on the general funds that go through the budgeting process every year to operate the system once it's constructed. But I'd say a couple of things. Yes, the funding package conversations are inclusive of looking at other modes of transportation. And two, the need for dedicated funding is rooted not only in the long-term thinking about mass transit for Middle Tennessee, but in shoring up existing operations that are currently placing a significant burden on the local budgeting process every year.
Okay, that's everyone that's, Councilman Pridemore, late to the queue, but better late than never.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate, ditto from what everyone said for you. I appreciate you being here tonight. One thing that just sticks out in my mind is what Ralph said initially, and you basically reiterated that. Until you have a specific project, until you know what option you're going, what direction you're going in, dedicated funding for something that you don't know what, and I don't mean that maliciously, you don't know, when you don't know what direction is best suited for the community and for the region, how do we do that? How do you seek dedicated funding for something you don't know what's best for the city at this time? That's what all this research, and that's what your all's job is to find out, is to determine what's the best way to go and what's the easiest way, most economical way to get there, and then seek the dedicated funding. I just don't understand. We're like putting the cart before the horse. Our community, this region hasn't decided what is the best way of having regional transportation, mass transit. And we know certain aspects are not going to be available. Is that right? I mean, there's, for instance, rail. That's basically not very feasible because of our position with local or companies. And I love rail. But my point being is we're kind of, it's nice to talk about dedicated funding, and it's great to know how much money you're going to have to spend. But I would hate to go to someone mentioned earlier about on a house for a mortgage. I would hate to go to the federal government, for example, and ask them for $15 billion, just using that as an example, and determine we didn't need half of that, or we determine and they're not going to give it to you if you don't dictate, or they're going to dictate where it's to be spent. So my point being, before I start rambling, is I just think we're going a little, how can you have dedicated funding when we don't even have a dedicated mass transit yet? And I know we have ideas, and it's great to have them, and I'm looking forward to it. And we have expanded, MTA has expanded, we've gotten better at it, we're getting more riders each year. Well, we got to start somewhere. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Domine, you have another question?
Just had a quick question, if we can get a copy of the PowerPoint so we can view that, because it's hard for me to see it on the little screen. Just like to have that. Thanks.
Sure. Councilor Blaylock.
This is just a little bit off topic, but you'd mentioned, that you do the bridges and streets. Do we have a list of the bridges that are in need of repair for Davidson County?
We do have a list of the bridges that are considered structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, and I can share that with you. If you go to our website and you look for the schedule of projects, you'll find really good information about sort of some of the major roadway projects. But when it comes to bridge repairs, those are typically implemented through programs, programmatically. And so I'd want to work with the Public Works Department and TDOT to get you a very specific list of the bridges that might be repaired in the next couple of years.
I'd appreciate that. How often do we, go underneath and survey the bridges? Do you know that?
I'm not sure offhand. That's something that the state, that's one of their responsibilities, is inspections on bridges across the state, whether they're federal aid eligible or not.
Thank you.
Mark Macy can probably provide some of that information too with Public Works. Okay, I see no other council members in the queue. I'm going to refute from the chair's position, I'm sitting out there now, what Councilman Pridemore just said. Ralph, I was on that 1992 trip. I got the books right here, 92, and transportation, buses, all those fancy words were always an issue, but every one of these communities had addressed dedicated funding. And we know what the plan is. We know we've got to move people from Murfreesboro and Clarksville and Lebanon and all these outlying. How you do it, whether it be bus or rail or above, below, all those things, doesn't make any difference to me. The experts will determine that. What is our timetable to have the discussion in the community? We already have projects proposed. Some citizens think it's the greatest project in the world, and some thinks it's the worst in the world. I take the position until I know how we pay for it, I don't want to even have that discussion. So I'm going to take a little bit different position than my good friend from Madison there, but at what point and what breaks the gridlock and who initiates the conversation on dedicated funding?
Sean, I'll hand this over to you after I make comment. First of all, let me just say, I think you've initiated the conversation. I think this is a good step in the direction to begin to discuss all of these options. We're out there, we're all out there researching. I think some of those communities that made decisions back in 1992 about where are achieving their funding for their transit are having to make adjustments just because they're seeing fuel consumption go down, they're seeing miles driven go down. We want to go out there and research all of the options so that you can see the implications of various and different types of funding.
Can you share a couple of those options other than general fund, property tax, sales tax type revenues?
I know that Michael has a more complete list, so I'll let him answer that. But I did want to stress to you that we're trying to gather information for you all, as are these professionals, that will allow you to answer the questions that you're asking, that you will be able to answer those questions. You'll be able to tailor the transit system to your needs. I couldn't help but smile, Councilwoman Bennett, when you were talking about the issue of speed. We know that people want to ride transit that is fast, frequent, predictable, comfortable, safe, etc., and that the current system needs that rapid feature. Well, there are going to be costs associated with it, and where best to draw the funds from to fund that. So I'm going to turn this microphone over to Michael so that he can tell you I think I've seen about 9 different options in communities for how they do dedicated funding. Maybe we'll invent another one as a community.
Just give me 2.
No, 9 will be fine.
The biggest yield of dedicated funding for transit in the nation is probably the sales tax. That's a penny sales tax in Denver that yields about $250 million a year. That's leveraged over $6 billion in federal funds over the last 15 years.
Okay.
Charlotte's Links is also a half-cent sales tax. Property taxes are dedicated, believe it or not, through the millage rate specifically to transit, like you've dedicated other portions of your property tax. Local option gas tax is oftentimes dedicated to transit. There are parking taxes that are dedicated to transit. There are beer taxes that are dedicated to transit. So communities have been really creative in pursuing dedicated funding for transit, and the right package is so context sensitive. It depends on what the rates already are for those measures, or what the climate is like specifically within the region, as to what that balance of revenue is across a variety of sources that might be viable.
Thank you. That's the first time I've heard some of these options. Hold on a second. That's the first time I've heard a substantive list of options that we can pick and choose. Now, coupled with Councilman Pridemore, we go out there and let's find the paths that make sense. Let's go out in the communities and see what people are willing to stomach. So let's close just from a comment from the mayor's representative. Shauna, if you would not speak for the mayor, but we know he's taking a leadership role, is there a timetable, or what do you see the next steps being from the administrative side?
I think that's a great question. And, there isn't a specific timetable. There's so many different pieces that are moving forward at the same time. So the MPO is working on its next long-term plan, and the RTA is working on its long-term plan, or its master plan, and the MTA is about to begin the process where they're updating their master plan. Now, all of those plans will come together, and they will help us build the regional vision. We've got the outlines already. You saw it in the MPO's bold new vision and in that tube map. But these plans will provide the details that we need when we're talking to people about, hey, Sumner County, we're thinking about implementing this sort of dedicated funding, and here's what it's going to buy you. These plans will help us explain to them what they're going to get, what their piece is, or what Williamson County's piece is. So that's really the next step. And, they are all of those plans are moving right now. And so, and at the same time, the Transit Alliance is out in those communities talking to them about the importance of why everybody needs mass transit in their everyday lives. So it's gotten started, and I wish I had an end date for you, but I don't. I can just say that, everybody is really making progress.
Thank you. I think we've discussed this issue. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and we've started a conversation and look forward to continuing. Thank you.